Chapter 16. The doorbells jangled loudly as Garrett stepped into the cool shadows of the pet shop. He ushered Caleb quickly inside and then shut the door behind them. "Marla?" he called out, his eyes not yet adjusted to the gloom within. "Over here," the vampire girl answered quietly. A somber hush filled the shop. The usually active fey creatures lay still and quiet inside their cages, with only an occasional rustling sound or buzzing wing breaking the silence. Garrett saw Marla then. She sat perched atop a high shelf in the corner of the shop, dangling a silver collar tied to the end of a long string. She gave it a spin, and the string shortened as it coiled around her fingers. When it reached the end, she spun it in the opposite direction, letting it unwind and then wind again around her fingers. Her dark hair hung over her eyes, and she gave no more acknowledgement of Garrett's presence. "Is everything all right?" Garrett asked. "I guess so," she said. The metal collar slapped into her palm, and she spun it loose again. "I brought my zombie to show you," he said. "Oh," she said, brushing her hair from her eyes and looking up. She wrapped the string quickly around her fingers and dropped silently from the shelf. A moment later, she stood before them. "His name's Caleb," Garrett said. "He used to be a thief, and I think he remembers some of his old life. Uncle says that's impossible, but I've seen him do stuff that other zombies can't do." "Hi, Caleb," she said, crossing her hands across her chest and bowing her head slightly. "So are you all right?" Garrett asked. "You seem a little sad." Marla frowned. "They won't let me ride the gaunts yet," she said. "I'm sorry," Garrett said. "Is it that you're too young?" "Maybe," she said, "but there's something else wrong. When my mother came back from her meeting, she seemed upset. She tried to hide it, but I could see something was bothering her. She said that she might have to go away for a while, and I would have to watch the shop until she came back." "Did she say where she was going?" Garrett asked. "Back to Threnar," Marla said. "She said it was council business, but she didn't explain any more than that. When I woke up this morning, she gave me a letter she had written for your uncle." Marla stepped behind the counter and came back with a crisp folded square of brown paper. It was sealed with a blob of red wax, stamped with a familiar-looking rune. "That's your father's symbol, isn't it?" Garrett asked. Marla nodded. "Mother still has his signet ring." "I'll give it to him," Garrett said, taking the letter. "Thank you," Marla said. "Oh, I did want to get some more essence from you," Garrett said, pulling 2 empty canisters from his bag. "Oh, actually, a priestess came by this morning and purchased all the stock we had on hand," Marla said. "I'm sorry." "Oh, that's all right," Garrett said. 2 flasks?" Marla said, looking down at the empty containers. "Does your uncle have a large commission? We should have some fresh stock in by the end of the week." "No, it was just a personal project," Garrett said. "A personal project?" she said. "Yeah, I wanted to try some of the things I'd been reading about in the wild magic book that my friend Max gave me." "I could render down one of the pets if you think that would work for you," she said, looking around at the many silver cages. A chorus of hisses and buzzing sounds arose from the small creatures trapped within. "No," Garrett said. "You can wait. I'm probably going to be too busy this week anyway." Marla shrugged, and the fey creatures grew silent once more. "All right. I'm sorry we don't have any scarabs left." "Do the priestesses usually buy essence from you?" Garrett asked. "I've never known them to use it before," Marla said. "The flasks the priestess gave me to fill had never been used before, and they weren't very well crafted. Her men had a whole cartload of them. I think they were visiting all the suppliers. Speaking of which, I could tell you some other shops you might try in case the priestess hasn't bought out the entire city's supply." "No," Garrett said with a smile. "You're the only girl I'd want to buy essence from." Marla smiled. "So tell me about your zombie," she said. "Well," Garrett said, turning to look at Caleb, "we used the essence of a satyr thief to make him." "Satyr essence?" Marla said. "That's illegal to sell here. I wonder where your uncle got it." Garrett shrugged. "It seemed pretty old. Uncle said he was a famous thief." "Perhaps you could discover his real name then?" Marla asked. "Maybe, but I kind of think his human body used to be a thief too." "Why is that?" she asked. "Uncle said he was killed by the night watch." Caleb made a low groaning sound.
And only a criminal would be out past curfew, right?
Marlin nudged Garrett with her elbow. Garrett laughed. I don't know, he said. I was just thinking that maybe he was special because we used the essence of a thief on the body of a thief. What if the reason zombies are so dumb, usually, is because we reanimate them with bug juice?
Even if that were the case,
Marla said,
I'm not sure we would want a bunch of smart zombies running around.
Why not?
Well, suppose you reanimate a bunch of dead enemy soldiers and tell them to attack their friends, she said. What if they're smart enough to decide they'd rather attack you instead?
Oh, I guess that makes sense, he admitted. Marla put her hand on Garrett's shoulder.
You're the only friend I've got, she said. I don't want you to get eaten by your own homework.
Garrett grinned. Chapter 17. Garrett arrived home just as the caterers were unloading their wagon. Uncle had hired Mrs. Nash and her sons to cook for the dinner party. Garrett's mouth began to water at the sight of the steaming trays of food the boys pulled from the back of the wagon. As much as he liked Tom, the kitchen zombie, Garrett still preferred to eat something prepared by a living cook, and Mrs. Nash was the best in the city. Hi, guys, Garrett called out as he approached the back of the wagon. Can I help carry anything in? The two Nash boys looked up and said, Hey, Garrett! This is the last of it, Pierce, the older of the two, said. He pulled a basket of warm rolls down from a rack inside the canvas-covered wagon. He had the high cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes, and fair hair common to the Freylands. Many of them had fled to the city when the Shadiri occupied their island home. What did you bring us? Garrett asked. Honeyed ham and pepper chicken, Kent, the youngest, interrupted. I guess Mr. Seneca's coming for dinner. Yeah, Garrett said. He likes a spicy food. Big event tonight? Pierce asked as Garrett followed the boys into the house. Uh-huh, Garrett said. A lot of the necromancers are leaving for the war tomorrow morning, so Uncle's having a party for them tonight. I hope they kill all the redbucks, Kent said, setting his platter of boiled eggs down on the counter as they entered the kitchen. Tom the zombie let out a low moan and looked at Garrett for instructions. It's all right, Tom, Garrett said. They don't need any help. Tom shambled further back into his corner and turned his face to the wall. No offense, Pierce whispered, but that thing gives me the creeps. You really let it touch your food? Yeah, Garrett said. Tom does a pretty good job, usually. It has a name? Kent asked. Oh, I just call him Tom, Garrett said. Uncle doesn't really name his zombies. He let me name mine, though, since I made him myself. He turned to indicate Caleb, who had just walked into the kitchen behind them. This is Caleb. Hi, Caleb, Pierce said with an amused smile. Kent just stared at the zombie with a disgusted look. Caleb's thin lips stretched back over his white teeth, and he groaned, his glassy eyes fixed on the younger boy. Kent started backward. Don't let him eat me, he yelped. Garrett and Pierce laughed. Zombies don't eat people, Garrett said. They don't? Pierce asked. What do they eat then? I don't know, Garrett said. Nothing, I guess. I mean, their insides don't work anymore, so they can't really eat anything. How do they fight the Shadiri, then? Pierce asked. I think they give them armor and swords and spears and stuff, Garrett said. They aren't very fast, but they are pretty strong. Huh, Kent said, picking up a long wooden spoon. I could beat one of them in a fight easy. So saying, the boy lunged forward, jabbing the bowl of the spoon into Caleb's belly. The zombie grunted and snarled as the boy leapt back. Kent, Pierce said, cut that out. I could beat one easy, Kent grumbled, putting the spoon back on the counter. You could beat one easy, Garrett said, but there would be 900 more of them right behind him. How many could you get before they got you? A bit of the color drained from Kent's face. And anyway, Garrett said, stabbing a zombie in the stomach isn't going to do you any good. Like I said, they don't eat anymore, so their guts aren't really important to them. If you don't smash their brains in, they just keep on coming. Gross, Kent said. Are you boys finished playing around? A woman's voice called from the kitchen door. You maybe want to do some work now? The Nash boys jumped and turned to face their mother. Mrs. Nash stood in the doorway. She wore a long, spotless apron with her white sleeves rolled up to her elbows to reveal her brown forearms. Though less fair in complexion than her boys, her hair shone almost silver. The shape of her face reminded Garrett of Annaleon's features, and he wondered if the Freylands might not be related to elves somehow.
afternoon, Master Garrett, she said, smiling at him. Good afternoon, Mrs. Nash. I hope my boys haven't been causing too much trouble, she said. No, ma'am, Garrett said. I was just telling them about zombies. Well, we're here to feed the living tonight, boys, so step lively, she said. I want everything set up in the dining room in half an hour. Yes, Mom, the boys said in unison. They grabbed platters and hurried out of the room. Caleb made a low rumbling noise as Kent pushed past him on the way out. Mrs. Nash moved to the basket of hot rolls and plucked one out, handing it to Garrett. Something to tide you over till dinner, she said. Thanks, Garrett said. He looked down at the soft bread in the palm of his glove and breathed in its delicious, nutty aroma. Something in the scent of it stirred up old memories, and he felt a lump growing in his throat. Are you all right, dear? Mrs. Nash asked. Yeah, Garrett said hoarsely. It just reminds me of my dad and Mom. We had a bakery. Something broke inside him then, and Garrett's shoulders began to shake. He clenched his teeth together, but could not keep from sobbing aloud. Mrs. Nash knelt beside him and held him as he wept. He tried to stop himself, but great racking sobs poured out from some place he had kept locked up for the past 3 years. Let it out, boy, let it out, she whispered, stroking his back as she held him. Everything all right, Ma? Pierce called from the doorway. Shh, she said, waving the boys off. Pierce pulled his younger brother away, and they found somewhere else to be for a while. I'm sorry, Garrett sobbed, trying to regain his composure. No, boy, she said. There's nothing to be sorry for. She pulled him close, hugging him tightly. Garrett felt a cold, rough touch through the hood on the back of his head. He turned to see Caleb standing beside him, looking down at him with sad, glassy eyes. The zombie gave him a sniff, reassuring pat on the head, and grunted. Mrs. Nash looked up with an expression of wonder, tinged with just a hint of fear. You see, she laughed nervously, you find family in the unlikeliest places. Chapter 18. Garrett came downstairs for dinner dressed in his best satin robe and hood of darkest indigo with black woolen hose and slippers beneath. Uncle seated him in the middle of the long table between Cynic and Max, while Uncle took his usual place at the head of the table. A dozen more necromancers of their acquaintance sat along either side, dressed in formal purple robes. The moment Uncle sat down, undead servants converged upon the table with pitchers of chilled wine in hand. The old man carved the ham with his favorite knife, a ruby-pommeled dagger with an impossibly thin blade that never grew dull. A ghast-wrought blade, Cynic whispered reverently to Garrett. Ghast-wrought? Garrett whispered back. The ghasts are boogeymen that superstitious folk frighten their children with, Max said. Any old thing you can find that looks better than what we can make today, you wave your hands over it and proclaim it was ghast-wrought. Cynic glared at his friend. And if you are too proud to admit your own ignorance, Cynic said, you can spend your days poking fun at anyone who knows more than you do. To ignorance, Max said, raising his cup in toast. May I never learn enough to know that I know nothing. Cynic chuckled and lifted his cup as well. Little danger of that, he said. Max looked as if he would speak again, but Uncle called for everyone's attention. Keepers of the dead, Uncle said, rising from his chair. Tomorrow you embark upon an expedition against the sons of Maleatis. Garrett caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of his eye and looked to see Cynic completing a surreptitious ritual gesture of warding against the blood god's name, his fingers crossed in front of his lips. I wish you all the best of luck in this noble endeavor, Uncle continued, and the table rang with the approving voices of the assembled necromancers. But of course, you all know that I don't believe in luck, he said. The younger men laughed in response. To that end, your meal tonight comes with a warning, Tinjin said. The Shadiri have moved their reserves to the south. Garrett saw the smiles fade from the faces of the other men. They will try to draw you in and trick you into committing your forces into what will appear to be an easy battle on open ground. The Shadiri will think nothing of sacrificing 1,000 men to bait their trap. You must not fall into it."
Uncle paused to let his words sink in.
"Guard your dead, for they will guard your lives in turn. Do not waste them as the Shadiri waste their living. Keep to the swamps. The water and the trees will hide your numbers and shield you from the Watcher in the sky. Keep your units spaced well apart and never match strength against strength. Always strike the enemy's weakness and then flee into the darkness before his strength can be brought against you. Do not be lured in by large numbers of unburied corpses. The enemy knows that we use their dead against them and will burn their dead when they can. Otherwise, they may be a trap for a greedy necromancer. Remember, when the enemy sleeps, he dreams of blood-drenched battlefields, where he crushes strong men beneath his boot. We are his nightmare, a foe that does not bleed, a foe that will not stand and answer his challenge, a foe that will creep into his tent and choke the life from him while he lies dreaming of glory."
The necromancers stood as one, cheering and applauding him. Uncle wore a troubled expression as he ran his hand through his pale hair.
"I wish I could tell you more," he said, "but I am a scholar, not a warrior. I look at you all, fine young minds. You should be studying."
The necromancers laughed. Uncle shook his head sadly.
"Do not be hasty to cast your lives into the jaws of glory," he said. "This world has too many dead heroes. I'm rambling now. Best to wrap things up."
Uncle Tingen raised his wine cup in toast.
"Brothers," he said, "turn the red tide."
The necromancers lifted their cups and cheered as one. Max grinned as he clapped Garrett on the shoulder, and Garrett smiled up at his friends. "Tomorrow, Garrett," Max Zara said, "the keepers of the dead go to war." Garrett rubbed his eyes and yawned widely as he helped the servants clean the dining room. Uncle Tingen sat in one of the many worn but comfortable chairs, staring blearily at the letter Mrs. Veranu had sent by way of Garrett. Garrett paused to watch as Uncle ran his fingers over the wax seal. The old man shut his eyes for a moment, bowing his head. He delicately pried the seal loose around the edges rather than breaking it. He unfolded the brown paper and squinted at it, moving the lamp on the small table beside him closer with his free hand. Garrett moved closer, absently picking up a half-filled wine cup and adding it to the stack he was making on a crumb-heaped silver platter. Uncle's lips moved slightly as his expression darkened. The weariness drained from his lined face and his jaw clenched. He looked at Garrett, who jumped at being caught looking.
"Garrett," Uncle said, "I think I'm going to have to leave you in charge of things for a while."
"What?" Garrett asked.
"I have some business to attend to out of the city. You'll have to make do while I'm away."
"Is Mrs. Veranu in trouble?" Garrett asked, setting his stack of dishes aside. Uncle Tingen remained silent for a moment, his eyes judging the boy.
"Yes," he said at last. "She needs my help."
"Are you going to the vampire city?" Garrett asked.
Uncle nodded. "I have a few friends left there. Lissa will need their help as well."
Garrett nodded, marveling that he had never before known Mrs. Veranu's first name, and that Uncle Tingen should call her by it.
"I may be away several months if it comes to that,"
Uncle said, rising from his chair and folding the letter. "Is someone trying to hurt them?" Garrett asked.
"Someone is trying to make the Veranus into something they're not," Tingen said. "And that is the worst sort of hurt."
"What do you mean?" Garrett asked. Uncle sighed, running his hand through his hair.
"Before Marla's father died, he asked me to take his family away from Threnar. He knew what would happen if they stayed. Marla is a very special girl, and there are those who would use her to further their own ends. Her father wanted her far away from all of that. Even so, I was barely able to get them out the first time.
Mrs. Ranu has done everything she could to keep her daughter away from that dark city, raising her on the road, living in exile. Still, if the elders ever joined their wills to it, nothing on earth would keep the girl from their grasp. Garrett breathed heavily, balling his fists. I would. Uncle smiled at him. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that, he said. In any case, the elders' indecision is our greatest ally. The old worms will argue a single point of contention over several lifetimes of men. The doom of immortals is politics, and it is a weapon I shall wield against them without mercy. Do you think you can keep things going here without me for a while? Garrett nodded. Good, Uncle said. Let's get some sleep then. I'll be slipping out during the excitement tomorrow.